Hi, this is Brandon from thirstgym.com. We're going to do another episode of Training Talk, and today what we're going to talk about is the difference between rack pulls and block pulls. Why would you use one or the other? Is there any difference at all, and how can picking on which one might benefit your training the most? So to briefly discuss things, rack pulls are basically pin pulls, or an exercise where you have the bar in the rack and then you're going to deadlift the bar out of the pin and focus on a particular range of motion. So usually you're going to set this around knee height, maybe a little lower, and basically it's going to work on the top portion of your deadlift. You can do this with a sumo or a conventional stance. Again, that's personally up to you. But generally the idea is that you're gonna pull a less range of motion to focus on an area that you're weak. And ideally when you set this up, you wanna set the pins actually a little bit below where you have issues. That way you can focus on driving through where you have the issues, the sticking point or the slowdown. And generally you're gonna do these for heavier rep ranges, probably set to 5 or less. Probably more ideal to do singles and doubles, because getting the weight just moving off the pins alone can be very challenging for some if you're picking this exercise correctly. So that's what a rack pull or pin pull would be. And a block pull would be doing something very similar, but we're actually doing it over on the platform where the blocks are elevated. Basically what I'm using here today is a table where the weight is elevated, and then you're going to deadlift the weight from that particular area, again focusing on a range of motion that you likely need more work in, or you could even be looking for some overload stimulus if you're trying to peak for, like, say, a powerlifting meet or a strongman competition, something like that. Now, the main difference between the two, without a doubt, is the fact the way you're able to gain leverage and how the bar breaks from the implement that you're using. So some of this is general physics. So if you have the bar on the blocks, the weights are out on the blocks, you're in the middle, and there's a nice good long lever arm. Basically the bar starts leaving the ground from the plates, just like when you deadlift. Nothing's different except that you're bringing the ground closer or higher up towards you, which is going to decrease the range of motion. Where on the pin side of things, the pins are narrower than the blocks would be. So getting it to break off there, one, is not going to look like your actual block pull or your actual deadlift. So keep that in mind just from that standpoint alone, that the physics of part of it is going to be more leverage towards doing the block pulls than the rack pulls, especially if you're a competitive deadlifter that uses competition kilogram plates. The way the weights break off the floor does matter. It's going to feel different. Ask anybody that's deadlifted on a deadlift bar with kilos or a deadlift bar with a bunch of 45s. They'll tell you the kilos always feels heavier, but I can tell you the weight is honestly pretty much the same. Factoring out the calibrated piece. So I think you'll find that that's going to be a big difference. Where when you're pulling from the pins and they're in closer, what you're going to find is one, that's different, but two, you're actually probably going to be able to leverage yourself underneath that bar better, especially if you're using a conventional stance. Anybody that's done this knows that when you get there, you can almost like lean back and leverage yourself underneath the bar, and then you can actually drive your hips forward, and it's definitely more of like it almost feels like a leg press in your hand, so to speak, where with a block pull, that's a little bit harder to do because, again, the weights can kind of roll a little bit. It's going to mimic more of your actual pull, and it's going to let you pull more slack out of the bar, which then is going to optimize your pull towards the competitive piece. Now, if you're looking for a training adaptation outside of that, let's say you're a bodybuilder or doing things for physique purposes, honestly, I would probably just go with a regular conventional rack pull. More cases than not, it's probably easier to set up. It's probably more accessible to most training facilities. And then I think you'll find as well that when you do that, you're going to be able to feel like you're getting more, because of that leverage piece, you're going to feel like you get a little bit more back work directly. I hate to say that because really it's a lower body exercise with a big push through the floor, but your back is still going to have to work, especially if you're doing heavy loads. The upper back musculature still has to hold on to that weight, just like you would if you were going to deadlift it from the floor. And again, so I think from a logistical standpoint, it just makes sense to do it in a rack, because you're kind of doing this from a physique standpoint, not from a maximum strength standpoint. So hopefully that makes sense. So the big thing I would emphasize on the rack pull versus the block pull is that, one, are you a competitive powerlifter? If you are, I would do probably more block pulls than I would do rack pulls, just so that your mechanics and the way that you deadlift and the way the bar breaks the floor, all of that is familiar and it resembles more of what's going to happen in the powerlifting meet that you need to be aware of. Where the conventional, or I'm sorry, just the rack pull, I keep saying conventional because generally you're going to do them conventional, but again, you can do them sumo. but generally your rack pulls are going to be more like your physique-paced people, or you might even have some athletes do them to work on just pulling for speed for a little bit and limiting the range of motion. And again, the logistical side is usually easier to set up. So that's the main difference between doing a rack pull and a block pull. It all really comes down to physics and what your kind of training goals are. But if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. Have a great day.